Let's talk a little bit about the issue of Jewish DNA or Jewish genetics. And this is not something that I was trying to jump into as a Christian apologist, but part of the challenge is whenever you discuss all the important things you want to discuss, a lot of Hebrew Israelites, unfortunately, they want to discuss other things. You know, you trying to discuss the Bible is what I mean. And then they want to discuss genetics. And then if you avoid it, it's like, oh, well, that's because you don't have the truth or something like that.
What do you call it? What do you call it, vocab? Hebrew hopscotch?
I use Hebrew hopscotch a little more particular. It's when they can't stay in a passage. So it's not just their tendency to have ADHD. I have another term for that. I call it ADHD, and I call it attention deficit hue disorder. So no matter what you're talking about, they talk about color. Attention deficit hue disorder. But Hebrew hopscotch is where they will not stay in a passage with any depth. They'll read part of a verse and then jump to some other verse without really going through the flow of a passage. Like, I've never seen anyone be able to walk a Hebrews like all the way through Romans 9 through 11 and sit in it, you know? So that's a Hebrew hopscotch idea. So let's talk a little bit about this Jewish DNA and all that. Okay, so for some reason, the Hebrew Israelites have this thought, this attitude that it's not just that they need to be Israelites themselves. They need to be considered Hebrew themselves. For whatever reason, it's like they think that the pie is only so big. And what I mean by that is they have to likewise take away the piece of the pie of most modern claimants to any type of modern Jewish identity. It's not just they want in, they want people out. And it's funny because I hold a covenant theology, which I know everyone doesn't, like GCon doesn't, as far as that kind of progressive covenant theology. However, they'll accuse like someone like me of replacement theology. But Hebrew Israelism is really the ultimate replacement theology. It actually is replacement theology, not just using that as a slur, which is kind of the way they used to describe my position and people like me, because they're literally saying, hey, it ain't none of y'all. It's us, right? And so let's go and look at some issues about some Jewish genetic studies. And I'm going to start with two key studies here. And these are very fascinating studies that were done. I'm going to give you the sources, and then you'll be able to find the links as well for yourself. And this is in relationship to something called the Cohen Modal Haplotype. Sometimes in the literature, you will see what I'm talking about here abbreviated as CMH, Cohen Modal Haplotype. And here, I'm going to bring up some Bible verses in a second, so I'm going there right now. Okay, let me have those. I want to have those on deck. Okay, and so here we are looking at two studies. Now, it's estimated that 5%, 7 million Jewish males are considered Kohanim, and that's the plural of Cohen, and that just basically means of the priestly line. It means descended from Aaron. And there's about 350,000 males that have that. So this is passed through the paternal side, you know, the male descendants directly. And there's some stats that will give you lower, like maybe 2 to 3, but it's somewhere in that range, you know, 2 to 5%, which would be about 7 million. And here's how some of that come about. This is very interesting. So previous generations of historians did not really have access to in a manner speaking, the history book that everybody carries around inside themselves, which is their genes. Historians did not have access to this prior. Now, historians who want to talk about some of these questions, asking certain questions about population groups, have access. And this really began, you begin to see this really in the 90s, especially the late 90s. And now you'll find this whenever it's necessary, historians interacting with genetic evidence, genetic questions. And it's a fascinating thing that's emerged. So the first paper I'm going to refer to that's based upon a study is from Nature, prestigious British journal there, volume 385, January 2nd, 1997. The title of this is Y Chromosomes of Jewish Priests by Michael F. Hammer. He's down there in Tucson, Arizona, which poor Tucson, that's our second biggest city, but it's a sad, dusty town. Carl Skrorecki, and Robert Bradman. They took 188 Jewish males, and they contributed genetic samples. They were from England, Israel, and North America. And then they were out also, if they were contributors, they were asked to describe their background, if they were a Cohen, Levi, or an Israelite. And from the analysis of this, they wanted to compare people who describes themselves or thought in some way based upon their last name, for example, like Cohen or Rappaport. They wanted to compare that to other people who were considered to be Jews, compare the non-Cohen with the Cohen. And here's what's fascinating from this first study I'm talking about. Two markers emerged. That's the study. That's it right there. Two markers emerged from analysis of the Y chromosome markers. The first thing was this thing called YAP negative. YAP negative. It stands for Y chromosome allele polymorphism. It's an insert sequence. And since it's YAP negative, that title denotes the absence of it. So it does not have the Y chromosome allele polymorphism insert sequence because it's YAP negative. The second was something that was a microsatellite repeat marker called DYS19. And here's what's fascinating. Out of 98.5, the Cohen remember there was 188 for this particular sample size. 98.5 had YAP, which means which is a fascinating thing, and that's significantly lower than in non-Cohenim. Now, some of that sounds a little confusing. The point is, two things emerged that were different out of the Cohenim population from the larger Jewish population, and things that some had and then things that didn't have. But they weren't going to stop there, right? So more research had to be done. And so there's a second research paper that I'm going to point you to. It's from July 9th, 1998, Nature, volume 394. The title of this is Origins of Old Testament Priests. Origins of Old Testament Priests. This is by Mark Thomas. Again, this man, Carl Skrorecki, Chaim Ben Ami, Tudor Parfit, familiar name a lot of people know, Neil Bradman, and David B. Goldstein. And they found more information. Here's what they found in this. And this one, if you want to show this one on the screen as well, it's Origins of Old Testament Priests, Nature, volume 394, from July 1998. Origins of Old Testament Priest, Nature, volume 394. You should be able to find an abstract of it there. You may have to put a little more information, like put Nature or July 1998, something like that. Let's see what pops up. Or maybe the name. If you put like David Goldstein, Tudor Parfit, I believe I see it. I believe I see it right there. It looks like you see it right there. Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
from that, here's what they found. And, you can look at these. We're showing you what they are. They found a particular array of 6 chromosomal markers. This particular array was in 97 of the 106 Cohenim tested. Now, this is important. I'm gonna stop here for a second to try to explain this. First of all, understand when we talk about the Cohen modal haplotype, sometimes people think, oh, that's like a gene. It's like the gene of Aaron. That's not what it is. It's a combination of neutral mutations that indicate a common lineage. Basically, it's not a Cohen gene. It's not the gene of Aaron. It's the Cohen genetic signature. And what's interesting about it is there are other Jews besides the Cohenim who have it, and Middle Eastern non-Jews who also carry it. So this is somewhat present in some Arab populations. So what does that show? This is really a marker of the ancient Hebrews. Most likely the marker of the shared patriarch. That's why this unique thing is in non-Jews who are of Arab descent as well, because they have a common patriarch there. But it's preserved in higher percentages within Cohenim. And here's why. If you could show on the screen Exodus chapter 40, verse 15.
Yep.
Exodus 40, 15. And again, G-Con, anytime you want to interrupt or cut off, I know you'll be able to follow up. You got all kinds of stuff. But anytime you want to be like, well, let me add something, you can, G-Con. If you,
for sure.
He's not muted or anything, is he? He's
go ahead, brother.
Okay.
He muted himself.
Okay, I got you. I'll read this while you're going there. I got the ESV up.
We go to 15.
Exodus 40, verse 15. Anoint them. Well, actually, let me start just a tad bit here before here. Sure. Let me start like in verse. Let me start in verse 12. Okay. Then you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and shall wash them with water, and put on Aaron the holy garments. And you shall anoint him and consecrate him, that he may serve me as priest. Here's the key. You shall bring his sons also and put coats on them and anoint them as you anointed their father, that they may serve me as priests. And their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood throughout their generations. Now, stop there for a second. Theologically, to fully have a full grasp of this, because we got to put our Bibles together, old and new, we need to go to the book of Hebrews. Now, we're not going to go there now because that would take us sort of afield. But to understand how does a command or injunction like this function within our current context, which is a new covenant context, right? To understand that, Hebrews is key for that. Okay, it's very key. It literally specifically talks about this issue. But we see the command of Yahweh to Israel here, and it's important. Their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood. So this is Aaron and his sons. So this is passed on through the male line. And here's also what's fascinating. This and we're not done with the results, but an interesting thing that shows is over the centuries, a relatively high rate of fidelity among the Jewish wives, or the wives, whatever they were, of these sons of Aaron, or descendants of Aaron, rather, who a lot of times end up with names indicating that. Now, they don't always, but they do sometimes, and it's fascinating. Sometimes they just have stories passed down from their family. Sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't. Right? That's what the testing here is about. But going back to the second study. Wait. But since you got the Bible up, let me show one other verse, because I'm trying to relate the science with why it's relevant. Could you go to Deuteronomy chapter 18? I'm sorry, you got the Bible up. We should probably go to this one other verse. Deuteronomy chapter 18. And
it's okay. I don't mind, bro.
Focus on verse 5, but I'll start reading before you get there. I'm going to start with verse 1, but focus on verse 5. The Levitical priest, all the tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. That's fascinating, by the way, because that's saying that those who are Levites, these are the descendants of Aaron, right? They're not going to have a part of the land. That's interesting because the Hebrew Israelites got Levi and Haiti. They've got them part of the land. Now they might say, well, that's not in Israel, that's in the diaspora. Still, it's just weird. They should be spread out amongst them. You know what I'm saying? They shall eat the Lord's food offerings as their inheritance. They shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The Lord is their inheritance. And by the way, this shows really God's intention. This is really now the portion of all Christians. God is our inheritance through Christ. See, it's a beautiful thing there. Sometimes people miss that, right? And that's fascinating because the Bible says in 1 Peter that now we Christians are priests. From those offering a sacrifice, whether ox or sheep, they shall give to the priest the shoulder and the two cheeks and the stomach. Shoulder of an ox, that's a what is that a ribeye? What is that part? That's a good part to use though for a Philly cheesesteak, by the way, is what I've heard. Okay, the first fruits of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, the first fleece of your sheep, you shall give him. For the Lord your God has chosen him out of all your tribes to stand and minister in the name of the Lord, him and his son for all time. By the way, notice here again, you actually see God's choosing of Aaron, just like God's choosing of Abraham or Israel. It's not based upon Aaron. I mean, Aaron did all kinds of stuff, and as you're going to see his sons will too. It's based upon God saying, look, this is because I choose this, right? It's very just fascinating to see the way God's grace and is moving with his people. It's a beautiful thing to see. He's a giving God. And if a Levite comes from any of your towns out of all Israel where he lives, and he may come when he desires to the place that the Lord will choose, and ministers in the name of the Lord his God, like his fellow Levites stand and minister before the Lord, then he may have an equal portion deep besides what he receives from the sale of patrimony. Okay, just showing that this is supposed to be a continued thing. And even through the diaspora, it appears that there was still some connection, and really because the DNA doesn't get it doesn't get lost because we're tracing it through the male side. You see what I'm saying? So in theory, going back all the way to Aaron, which we're going to talk about here a little bit more in a second, because it's on the male side strictly. It's paternal, not maternal, that we're discussing here. It's very, very important as well. And you even see today, like in the synagogues, they'll sometimes do something called the priestly blessing. They read, I believe, a portion out of Leviticus, and it's like the split fingers. And Some people know this, some people don't. But Leonard Nimoy, who is a Jewish extract, who played Spock in Star Trek, the original series, he improvised that for Spock's character as a Vulcan greeting. He would split apart and say, live long and prosper. And if you think about it, the live long and prosper line is similar to the Levitical priesthood blessing that the priests actually give. That's where he got it. It's out of his Jewish background. It's a fascinating little tidbit relating to Star Trek that relates out of this issue. It's a very fascinating thing. Now, let's go back, if we could, to that study, because I'm going to be talking about the other things they found from that study, origins of Old Testament priests there. And reiterating that they found a particular array of 6 chromosomal markers that was in 97 of the 106 who were tested. All right. The chances of this are less than 1 in 10,000. And here's what's wild. There's a common set of genetic markers in both Sephardi and Ashkenazi alike when it comes to the Kohanim worldwide. And since it's worldwide, it indicates a common origin predating the split of these two communities, which is said to be around 1000 AD. But here's what's crazy. It's not just Sephardi and Ashkenazi. Now, this is going a little bit outside of the test, which what I'm talking about right now, these are subsequent tests. Origins of Old Testament priests. That's the test I'm discussing right now. I don't know if you can put that back on the screen, the abstract of it, so people know what we're discussing. But here's what's wild. They did this later on, and Tudor Parfit was directly related to this, and I could tell the story about that. It's a fascinating thing. They did this later on as well with the Buba clan of the Lemba. So the Lemba are from South Africa and Zimbabwe, and basically they told Tudor Parfit, hey, they were in South Africa when this happened. Hey, we're also Israelites. We heard you've been working with these different communities and whatever, and hey, we're also, and so come check us out over here. We have oral traditions, and you'll believe us. And Tudor Parfit, he's kind of he's like seems like he's like a moderate Anglican. He's not. It's like, really, he's skeptical. Is my point by saying that. But he goes over there, and they end up doing the testing, and it ends up that the identical percentage of by some accounts, identical percentage of those who have this Cohen modal haplotype was present in the male side of the Buba clan, which it ended up being 52%, according to Parfit, 52% on the male, kind of like their priestly class that they had, the Buba clan. So it's out of one of all the groups they had. So it's not all the Lemba. Sometimes people talk about the Lemba and they're like, well, the Lemba. Well, the evidence is there from the Buba clan specifically. That's where the testing has been to my knowledge. I don't know about all the whole larger population of the Lemba, but it's within the Buba clan, certainly. And it matches Sephardi and Ashkenazi populations. It's almost unbelievable. So you have these folks who are all over the world, because there was a scattering according to Deuteronomy 33, chapter 30, verse 3, and 2864, that scattering happened. And even though Jews make up less than 0.25% of the world's population, there have been historically almost everywhere, all over the globe. And the fascinating thing is then they end up having these genetic markers regardless of the phenotype. And the phenotype is the way you look and can change, because our DNA differences are a very small percentage. We match up, almost every single one of us matches up. The most interesting things, though, there, of course, is in the differences that we have between each other. But it's so small. That's why somebody can look like whatever, basically, and still have these genetic markers underlying. So the Lemba look like other Bantu-speaking peoples, relatively speaking. The Ashkenazi look, relatively speaking, like other Eastern Europeans. The Sephardi look, relatively speaking, like other North African Jews and Spaniard Jews. And yet, they have these things. And it's not just them. There's another community that's interesting that I'm just learning about today, a much smaller community. Say what?
The Samaritans, Cohen has it too.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Can you say a little more something about that? Because I feel like I feel like the Samaritans get left out of the conversation a lot. I don't know if you have anything else to say about that, but thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yeah, so what happens is when you look at the Samaritan, among the Kohen, they realize that whatever group that they're in, whatever Jews that there is, among the Kohen, the priests, they all have this marker, which is a J1C3 marker, or J1, which they call, I think, it comes from the J subclad. So then the Samaritans also have J1 and J2 markers. Now these markers originated outside of Africa. So then when you look at, like he said, the Buba tribe, and they have these markers, then you begin to see that they themselves, now it's not necessarily a Jew marker, but what it is it's a marker. It shows that they have close relationships, shared genetics with each other, real close, and it's been constant. So they can look at the rate between of this mutation that they see, and look at the mutation to say that this can date back, because they believe that it's constant. It can date back to a specific ancestor, the closest ancestor that they had. And so when they did the rate, like you said, it came all the way back to the times of when Aaron and them would have been looked at. And so that's how they're looking at these things. But a lot of these groups that are Jews have this marker, and this is an out of Africa marker. And one of the things that we look at, which we're going to talk about, but I'm going to let them finish, is that a lot of African Americans that say that they basically are Jews or Israelites don't have a lot of out of African markers, and when they do, they have European, like probably R1B or something like that, which European Jews have R1B too, but they also have autosomally traced back to the Middle Eastern and have mutations at a high level on their chromosomes. And so when you look at what he's saying here is that this is similar with a lot of other Jews. And so if you're saying you're an Israelite, we know geographically certain mutations picked up, certain haplogroups came along, subclads that's outside of Africa, that's in those areas where biblically Israelites would have came from. Why is it that you're saying that you're an Israelite and you're an African American, but you don't have those markers? You don't have none of those markers, and so that's what we're looking at, and what we want to get to later on farther into some studies, especially about the Ashkenazis. But definitely, there's many other groups that also have this marker just as well, J1C3 marker, and which they could name it as the Cohen marker, basically.
Yeah, and again, I'm glad you brought up the Samaritans, because a lot of times they get left out, and it's true they're mixed, if people want to say that, but I mean, everybody is, including the populations we're studying. To kind of put I'm going to go back to that study briefly, but to put a scholar's like response on it, so people can kind of understand. He basically, because I like this scholar, Dr. Harry Oster, he's written a really good book on the topic as well. He has a quote about this, and he has a good book I recommend people get. It's called Legacy: A Genetic History of the Jewish People. It's on Oxford. It's a really important book to if you're really trying to get into this. And here's what he says. He's the chairman of the Human Genetics Program at New York University School of Medicine, by the way. Quote, "Recent work from genetics labs has validated the biblical record of a Semitic people who chose a Jewish way of life several thousand years ago. These observations are the biological equivalent to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggesting that despite 2,000 years of diaspora, the relatedness of the Jews of Eastern European, Ashkenazim, North African, Sephardim, and Middle Eastern, Oriental origin can be demonstrated by genetic marker analysis." It's an amazing thing. And just like G-Con said, this most recent common ancestor, who it looks like for all intents and purposes is Aaron, dates back as far as sort of the genetic clock that they can kind of use 3,300 years. That's the approximate time. And this is based upon the variation of the mutations among Kohanim today. And then they kind of look at the time frame, and it yields 106 generations away from the most recent common ancestor. That's 3,300 years. That's around the time of the Exodus. So there's somewhat of a margin of error here, but it's actually an interesting apologetic biblical proof, regardless of all this stuff with Hebrew Israelites and all that, because sometimes people are like, well, Moses didn't exist. And well, we have basically genetic evidence for Moses' brother and genetic evidence really ultimately for Abraham himself. Now they'll be like, oh, that's circumstantial unless we can take a sample from Abraham. But the thing is, this is kind of how things like this work when you do this. This is the way it is. And this has been a fascinating thing. And the reason why there's an explosion specifically in Jewish DNA is because of their tendency not to intermarry. Now, what happens is Jews intermarry at a greater rate when persecution is less. But throughout much of their history, persecution is greater. And so this is an important thing because you have sort of this isolated community that's traveling around the globe. There's not a whole lot of people groups that sort of have that shared type of history. It's a fascinating thing. Now, things are changing, and that's why this research, it's almost like the perfect timing. Things are changing because, especially in the West, Jews they intermarry, you know what I'm saying? But we can look, and it's a fascinating thing to look. There's other isolated communities that they do this with. The Jews aren't the only one. There's certain communities, and you could talk about them. But this is a very, very fascinating thing because it also has this oral tradition that's not just oral. It's written at this point, a written history that actually corroborates this genetic evidence. It's almost unbelievable, and that's why a lot of the scholars who are involved in this, a lot of them are secular. I don't know if there's any like sort of confessional people, and even the ones who have some kind of faith commitment seem decidedly secular. They buy into evolution and everything else. So they're like constantly being surprised, like, well, I guess maybe this is right. They're constantly being surprised when you listen to lectures and talks, or when you read what they write sort of in their frank moments. You kind of see this constant surprise, but now it's almost just a matter of fact. It's just working out more and more of the details. So back going to this, at the 1999 Jewish Genome Conference in Israel, Professor Hammer, who was involved with the first study that I mentioned, and has been involved a lot with this, he confirmed the numbers he gave were that 80% of all self-identified coenemes share a common set of genetic markers. And we mentioned that it's 6 different things together. So it's sort of a genetic signature. And that's important to understand. And it's just a fascinating thing. This means the line of the coeneme is a direct paternal line from Aaron, the very first high priest. That's what it means. And, he mentioned this, the Samaritans, Jikon did. This has also been tested with other populations. I got off track. Well, I wanted to mention them, but I forgot to mention one other group. I had mentioned the Lemba and the Buba clan within the Lemba, and their priestly class, and how the numbers are very similar there to other populations. But it's also true with these smaller groups. Like there's a small population who has a tradition that they left Israel in 70 AD. They have a kind of a coeneme class that's a people group off the island of, I think it's called Derjaba, DJERBA. It's off the coast of Tunisia, so Northern Africa. They sampled theirs as well. They also had the CMH, that's a Cohen Modal haplotype, and also Jews from Jerusalem's old city as well. So this is fascinating stuff. Now, the other thing I mainly have is kind of leave some of that, and then what I have is sort of reactions by different researchers to this, different geneticists, because I think it's helpful sometimes to say, okay, what are they saying about this? And then I have a little bit on the Khazars, but I'll stop there. I'll probably read some of these reactions if that's okay, but then I'll stop before we get into Khazars, and I have a little bit more on Lemba and a couple other things. But I know G-Con's going to do some follow-up. But let me show some of these reactions, and some of these you can find in a very accessible book called DNA and Tradition: The Genetic Link to the Ancient Hebrews by Yaakov Kleiman. And I like it. It's very kind of user-friendly, and it leads you to the broader sources if you want to get into them. But let me read some of these. Okay, so we'll start here with Dr. David Goldstein. He's a molecular geneticist at Oxford, okay? And here's what he says, and I got all the links and sources if anybody wants. Quote, "It looks like this chromosomal type was a constituent of the ancestral Hebrew population. It was incredibly exciting to find something that could be tracing paternally inherited traits over 100 generations, 3,000 or 4,000 years of history," end quote. And then here is another guy. Let me get his credentials up here. Carl Skrorecki. He's the Rappaport Research Institute Director of Nephrology. That's basically a kidney specialist at Rambam Medical Center, Technikon, Israel Institute of Technology. Listen to what he says. Quote, "The oral tradition of the priesthood has a DNA or genetic counterpart. The scientific information confirms that the majority of contemporary Jewish males who identify themselves as coenem are descended from a common male ancestor who founded a patrilineal dynasty consistent with the tradition of the Jewish priesthood. It's almost equivalent to finding a remnant of the garb of the first priest's family, as if you went to the Sinai and found some remnant of Aaron's anointment ceremony." And then he says this: "The simplest, most straightforward explanation is that these men have the Y chromosome of Aaron. The study suggests that a 3,000-year-old tradition is correct and has a biological counterpart." It's just, I don't, This is so amazing when you look at it. Here's Professor Michael Hammer. Here's what he says about it. Quote, "At first I was worried that it was a sampling artifact, a chance result of the group chosen because of the high frequency." So what he's saying is he thought it was a mistake because it seemed impossible that this could be right. He thought there was an error, right? It was incredibly exciting to find something that could be tracing paternally inherited traits over 50 or more generations, 3,000 to 4,000 years of history. This is the first time ever we have been able to make a correlation with an ethnographic record over this time scale. Some people keep records that go back 3, maybe 4 generations, but 50 or more generations. It's a beautiful example of how father to son transmission of 2 things, one genetic, one cultural, gives you the same picture. That's amazing. And then I got like 3 more quotes that are all from Dr. Neil Bradman. He was one of the principal researchers on some of these studies. And listen to what he says. "The Kohanim should all have the same Y chromosome if they come from an original source or a single individual." And so essentially that's kind of the hypothesis that was being tested by these guys. "I must say, I was tending to expect it to come out the other way." So again, he was skeptical. And listen to what he says here about that. "The difference between the Kohanim and the Israelites in both the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic population was statistically significant. While we did not detect a statistically significant difference between the Kohanim of the Ashkenazic and the Kohanim of the Sephardic, indicating that this oral tradition seems to have been around for the last 1,000 years. So let me explain what he's saying there. He's saying there's a significant difference between the Kohanim and the rest of the folks who would be described as modern Jews. But between the Kohanim class of Ashkenazi and Sephardic, there's not a statistical big difference. That's amazing. That's saying across basically 2 massively different communities, this one group is very similar. They're more similar to each other, even though they're in 2 different communities, than they are to the rest of the Jews around them. That it's almost, again, this is almost unbelievable. Listen to this, what Bradman says here. "Work that we're doing on additional Jews in different communities should enable us to get an insight into whether this time can be pushed backwards or not and how the priesthood may or may not have originated," he remarks. "What I have to say is that we have not, despite what some newspaper headlines may have said, proved that the Bible was correct, and we have not shown that Aaron did exist." So you see, these guys, again, are skeptical. They're like, we're not proving the Bible right. They want to make sure they want to make sure they're saying that because that's not their goal or mission. You see what I'm saying? But nonetheless, I mean, I think we can see this is clearly corroborative, and they said that. So it's like, okay, why didn't I need to say that? And then one last thing I'm going to read. We've been inundated with people who write to us asking for their Y chromosomes to be tested. Unfortunately, I cannot stamp anybody's Y chromosome to prove anything. This is simply a population study. And so one thing about that is this is the last thing I mentioned. I kind of handed over is Tudor Parfit, who had been involved with some of this. When people started hearing about it, there was a group that had a population off the coast of Papua New Guinea, or was in that area. They had heard about what Tudor Parfit was doing with like the Lemba, for example. And so they call him, and then the leader of the community comes to his hotel room, right? And is like, "Hey, I want you to do us as well, because you're going to see we're Jews as well." And so the community is all excited because they think, ours is going to match up as well. This particular group, there in Papua New Guinea, the results were negative. The way Tudor Parfit put it was, he said, I think he used the phrase zilch, or the word zilch. And it was kind of a tough thing because he had to announce this community. And he said he kind of chickened out. He said, "Well, the results were inconclusive. We can't say anything for sure." But basically, then he said, "Well, yeah, there is a negative result." Now, the community itself still believes the same thing. It has not affected them, in the sense of like, well, they're continuing to go on saying that, but the genetic evidence doesn't match. So it's not like everyone that gets tested, this happens. But it did happen again with Tudor Parfit, interestingly enough, and it's with a small Jewish community there in India, very small, and they're at the bottom of the caste system. And basically, everyone laughs at them because they say they're Jews and they've been mistreated for centuries, and they're basically, pariah, right? And they're like, "Test us too." Well, they also had the Cohen haplotype, and it matched up, and so the DNA in that instance exonerated them. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It almost kind of like okay, we're their vibe was kind of like, we're suffering for a reason. It's true, we're not just saying it, but it doesn't always work out. Like the most controversial one is probably the Igbo, because that is a rather large group of people, and the DNA evidence has come back as negative. Now I know the Hebrew Israelites who believe in the Igbo thesis are going to be all upset and you're lying and this and that. But basically, look, I'm not a geneticist, so I'm finding out what they say, and I am in trying to go with the evidence as careful as I can. And
yeah, when majority of them are all saying one thing, because we had someone in the chat say, I don't trust most geneticists. Well, I said, well, when 99% of them are all saying the same thing, you kind of have to listen,
it's like this. Right? That's fine if the person doesn't want to trust it, but tell us why. Why don't you trust them? Tell us what, and it's not about just trusting geneticists. It's about these results. And these are teams and groups of people who this is their specialty. They're not dabbling in DNA on the weekend as if you could do such a thing. These are specialists in this area. Yeah. No one is, it's not just an argument from authority. It's saying, look, we have this and now it matches. Let me tell you something though, because it's funny they said that. I'm going to tell you something. If they did testing, let's say the Hebrew Israelites in North America had some version of the Cohenim, like, oh, look, everyone with the last name of, let's use Laron's last name. Everyone with the last name of Campbell, we've discovered is highly likely to be Cohenim. And let's say that they did testing on Black Americans in North America with the last name of Campbell, right? And they're like, oh my goodness, look at this. It matches up. This is amazing. I guarantee you they would trust those genetic results. Like, oh, look at it. Because they try to do that with the Lemba. They'll be like, whenever we talk about genetic, like, well, you haven't mentioned the Lemba. And then we talk about the Lemba and also how it's irrelevant to most Black Americans because they're in Zimbabwe and South Africa. That's not the West Coast people. It's not the West Coast, right? And so the point by saying that is this is not a significant factor in who came over in the transatlantic slave trade or who ended up in Western Hemisphere. And so it's like, okay. And also if you verify the Lemba, if you're going to use them, you're verifying the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic, and these other populations we've mentioned. It's like it's a catch-22 if they want to do that. But, if any of these guys have ever gotten a battle about, that's not my kid, I guarantee you they'll trust those results. That's
sure.
right. If they they know and it turns out that way.
Good point.
But, nonetheless, they'll say that, but that's fine. Tell us the reasons why. Tell us what's wrong there, and explain it, and things like that. And even with people who get exonerated for crimes they didn't commit because of DNA evidence, we celebrate that. That's a good thing, right? That's sort of 2 or 3 witnesses. One of the witnesses is sort of
that's a good point. Right? You can convict someone's entire life these days based on DNA evidence. So I mean,
or exonerate them.
Yeah.
And we celebrate that. And I guarantee if these guys have any sense of justice, they celebrate that as well.
Not too many people put into question that DNA evidence in the courts and stuff when it comes to that, right? And I just want to say quickly, thank you, Operation Cuteness, for the support for the super chat. She said, Vocab, can you talk about the E1B1 gene? Love, Nick, thank you. I don't know. We'll probably get there. I don't know if she's saying the gene right, but...
Well, okay, so that's a perfect segue to have me kind of chill and let G-Con speak. That exact question she just asked. So, G-Con, you just let me know if you need me, and because someone brought up E1B1A. So,
right. And so I'm actually E1B1A on my paternal side.
Hey, G-Con, I was wondering if you could maybe give people just like a quick introduction about your background and stuff, because this is the first time I ever met you. Maybe a lot of my subs ever met you too, so if you don't mind. You got the email on his face. Can you put me down there? Oh, sorry, bro. Yeah. Sorry.
You can't see his the bottom of his beautiful beard.
Yeah, I meant to do that actually when people are talking. Right. I just got that up there, guys. If anyone wants to come on the show and has questions, that's my email on the screen. So send me an email and I'll send you a link. Sorry, go ahead.
So I used to be a Black Hebrew Israelite just as well. I want to say 2002, around that time. Or 2001 actually, in that area. And so I was we didn't deal with the Old Testament. It was more so what Yahweh ben Yahweh. I mean, we didn't deal with the New Testament. It was more so Yahweh ben Yahweh. And so I got into that at a young age. And, I was in it for I want to say probably 2 or 3 years. Well, I'm going to say 4 years actually. And so during that time, I was taught a lot of things concerning, you know, a lot of hate, basically, you know, a lot of hate, you know, against other nations, against Africans, you know, because they sold us to the white man. That's what I was told. That's what, you know, I was learning at that time. And so I hated the Africans. And so we used to talk about Africans, and then we used to talk about also whites just as well. And so I came up out of that because I started studying a little bit when it comes to Isaiah 53 concerning the Messiah. And so when I went and asked him about, hey, this looked like this is talking about Jesus, who, you know, this in the New Testament. And so they couldn't answer that. And so I started going through a plethora of other scriptures in Isaiah. And so that's what made me kind of get out of that. Plus, I couldn't find myself to have a level of hatred that they wanted me to have. So I felt myself to where I was actually faking, which a lot of the Hebrew Israelites actually do, because they would never, if they seen a white baby or an African baby, you know what I'm saying, let that baby starve or sit outside. Some of them would, you know what I'm saying, but a lot of them that was faking like I was, they wouldn't do those things. They would help that child out. And so that's how I see myself. I didn't see myself as being having that type of hatred in me. So I felt like I was being fake. But that's when I really I'm sorry.
Sorry, man. I was going to say that's a good quality that you wouldn't let a baby starve.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And so that's when I really came out of a lot of that and became a Christian. I had a lady who used to talk to me a lot, and she introduced me to her brother. He would take me to church. And from then on, I just, you know, been speaking against a lot of those ways, a lot of those falsely taught things, and ran across Vocab and Faithful and a couple of other people, you know what I'm saying? But prior to that, years after down the line, because like I say, it's been, you know, I met them around what's it been, 4 years, Vocab, probably 3 years, around 3 to 4 years, I believe.
This is kind of off topic, but someone just made a super chat, so thank you. They just want to know, can a non-Israelite be a part of the 144K? Like, I'll answer and get it out of the way. I just because it's a super chat. Like, what do you think about that? Just a quick answer.
Me and Vocab kind of differ on that. My position is that a non-Israelite cannot be part of the 144K. That they are a evangelistical group at that time within the tribulation that brings a lot of souls to Christ.
Sorry to get you off topic. I just kind of like to try and honor those. So, but yeah, continue, man, with your story. And we were talking about E1, B1, I think. Right?
Okay, you wanted to speak on that about the 100?
Yeah. If I could drop a link, I'm gonna drop a link in the live chat because G-Con and I went on Sister Cherry's platform.
Okay.
And we actually discussed this exact thing. I think it was a very profitable, good discussion. Okay. I gave my perspective, and then G-Con shared his view, and so you get to hear both views. We discussed that passage in detail. I think we were probably on there for an hour or more. Nice. I'll send that link. I'm going to find it right now while he's talking. I'm going to drop in the live chat. Go.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that was a great conversation that we definitely had. And so but yeah, so that's kind of like how I got up out of that. And as far as the question about E1, B1A, like I say, that most of that's EV38, or I think they call it, what do they call it? They call it EV38, right? That subclass that you see is where I'm actually from, but it originates out of Africa. And so the problem is when somebody say that E1, B1A is a Israelite marker, it's a problem with that, because you should at least you should at least have something that originate outside of Africa. Why? Because Israelites, according to the biblical text, wasn't born in Africa. Yeah, they went to Africa, and they picked up markers, but they wasn't born in Africa. So the closest we get is like E3 markers. But then you have E1, B1. Now E1, B1 you find to where it's going to be somewhere in the Levant area. You're going to have E1, B1 in North Africa just as well. But when you look at most African Americans, they don't have, like me, I don't have E1, B1, but you should have E1, B1 if you say that you are an Israelite, or you should have, some J markers, J2 markers. K markers, and they most people got G markers, I markers. These are markers that originate outside of Africa. So then they'll say on the maternal line, they'll say things like L3 markers, but they originate in Africa and then they spread across. But even with that, you still is not consistent with what we see in the biblical text, tracing in geographical areas of markers that that Israelites are people who are Middle East should have picked up on their chromosomes from these geographical locations. When you go to these areas, you'll pick up mutations on your chromosomes that we pass down to your children, whether it's on the Y or the X chromosome. And once you accumulate those mutations, they can look at those they can look at those pairs and look at the like you said, a biological clock. They call it a biological clock, to where the within the genome there was something that triggered that was different, that they might have picked up a mutation outside of the norm or either in the norm, whether it's through sexual selection, it might be through climate, diet, environment. And so you can look at some of these groups, and once you look at some of these mutations, they're outside of Africa. And so like me, I have genes that come from also Europeans. I have like 14% European genes because my grandpa is white, my mom's dad is white, and so you can look at it some of those things. Like even when you talk about like Africans, most Africans that are in West Africa, if you notice, they don't have beards. They can't grow beards, a lot of them, and that's weird. But they can't really grow it a lot. And so when you look at a lot of African Americans that do grow beards, then a lot of them have an admixture of what we see of European genes.
You know, that's a good point you bring up, because I live in Canada, and a lot of the native you guys call Native Americans, they can't grow beards or facial hair very well at all either. So
they can't grow it at all. And so when you look at that, it's a thing to where even when you look at those who had E1B1A among the Egyptians, if you look at it, a lot of them would take beards and actually paste them on their face, or in their relics, put them on their face, attach beards to their face, because they couldn't really grow beards like that. And so you know, that's what we have to look at too, just as well as consuming milk is another one. Most people who are in the Levant area are shepherds. Also, most people who are in North Africa are shepherds too. And so you kind of see that there's admixture there. But for the most part, a lot of these guys who are saying that they're Israelites, you guys need to really take a DNA test, because if you can't go and get a snip and look at somebody who's from Arabia, because you should have markers out of those areas autosomally. If you can't get somebody who's been through these areas that Israelites have biblically been, if you look at the text and also look at extra biblical sources, then you can't say that you're an Israelite, because once we take the DNA test, we see that you're like 88% there's pure African, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, if you're going to say you're an Israelite, at least have some of these markers that came out of the areas of what biblical Israelites were they geographically at, and they don't have.
Yeah, that's another thing I want to ask you is like, how do you feel about like a lot of the Hebrew Israelites that are calling like Africans disgusting, and like I think they should embrace their like African heritage, like where they come from, you know? How do you feel about that being an African American? That's what I want to ask you.
I feel really bad about that, because at one point I used to do the same thing, and really it's really a thing of self-hate. And also you have to understand that when people have been taken into servitude or taken into slavery, they want to identify with something. And so because they want to identify with something, and I wanted to identify with something, that's the first thing to where I will identify with. Why? Because when you look at the biblical text, it explains servitude, not just from a black perspective, but from a perspective of human beings, of why human beings became servants in the first place. And so once you look at that, you identify with that. And once you identify with it, you can identify with the servitude, which is fine. But this is not just a Israelite thing. This is not just a black thing. Servitude came into place after the fall of Adam. When you look at Adam, when he fell, he became into servitude. Whether if he's tilling the ground, it's going to bring forth harsh times. So he's going to see if there's a servant that can help his task a little bit easier. That's what most human beings was looking at, to make it easier on them because of these harsh times and the curse of the earth. And so when you look at that, I felt really bad to look and see and say that I can look at my ancestors and really say I hate them, and then say, well, I don't come from them because of certain things of how they live. Well, I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna let Vocab go in. But when you look at African cultures, when you look at cultures that are not just African cultures, but cultures who are more so, I'm gonna say, more so nature bound, naturally bound. A lot of these people, they live off the land, and a lot of things that we care about as Americans, as being civilized, we do so more so of destroying the earth just as well. You know what I'm saying? And even though they live more so in a primitive way, it's more so closely to a natural based type of lifestyle. And there's nothing wrong with that. Whereas we get upset with that, and we look and we say, well, these people are so primitive, or whatever case may be, which is not a bad thing. But then also when we look at people who are civilized, that's a great thing if they civilized. To each his own. But for the most part, I'm not going to judge somebody because I realize that I say, well, these people may be on a sense they're not dealing with modern science, or they're not dealing with certain things. They may be dealing with some type of tradition or whatever the case may be. But for the most part, I'm not ashamed of who I come from or where I come from, because when I look at what traditionally Africans have brought forth, you have your Africans that have also been high advanced in civilization for us East Africans and North Africans. And then when you start talking about people who went farther west, they didn't deal with a lot of gold. Really didn't mean too much to them to where they'll trade you for gold. They use it for their idols, whereas we do certain things with gold, whatever the case may be, or silvers. And so I'm not ashamed of none of those things. I believe that to each his own, but for the most part, in Christ is where I basically identify at. And that's what was best for me, to where when I read the Bible, I found that my identity to be in Christ. Now I'm going to say this, and people might get upset with what I'm about to say, but Christ is asking you to do something normally that a person who's been traditionally in rooted in their ancestors types of beliefs that they wouldn't want to do, and that he's asking you to follow him. And so when he asks you to follow him, a lot of those traditions that wasn't right traditions that Christ is asking you to lay those things down, like Paul did. A lot of these traditions and certain things that he counted it as dung to come to Christ. And so that's one of the things that, whether you black, whether you white, whoever, culturally, whoever you are, when you're a Christian, you ought to take on what Christ is doing, what he's doing, what the biblical text tell us through his epistles, what the Spirit of God is telling you that bears witness of the word of God through the gospel. And that's what we should take on. And so I don't have no problem with looking at a person and saying, I'm not really ashamed of that. But at the same time, I do need to transition and really walk with Christ and really take on that lifestyle, because ultimately when you get to the end times, the Bible, it says that everyone is going to take on the ways and be conformed to the image of the Son. So that's something we might want to think about. Yeah, you might be holding on those things right now, but when you come to Christ, you need to count a lot of those things as dung, and really follow Christ. Not saying that a lot of those things are wrong, because some of those things that we see, the natural man have things that are concerning God that is in him by nature. But a lot of those other things is just not really good. So that's what I got to say about that.
Good stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much, man. That was awesome.
If I could comment from a comment, great job, guys. But this is what we get. Hamite Queen said, I thought there were going to be DNA specialists here. Okay, let's pretend the ones that they were quoting were here. Would that change anything? Did you get anything out of this? So we have to be a specialist to come talk to something. We can't read a book.
Sounds like G-Con actually.
This is what I want
quite a bit. Sorry.
I know, but this is that kind of silliness, guys. I'm trying to really further the conversation here. You know for sure no one you're listening to on that side is a specialist. So why would you expect that here, number one? And number two, be gracious. These guys are giving us knowledge. So I'll say that.
Yeah, it's funny because I thought they were going to be specialists, but the other guy, I don't trust any of the specialists.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's like the
we're not specialists, but what we want to do is to show you what the specialist is saying. That's why there's an article that I actually wanted to bring out that talks about Ashkenazi Jews, which is an article to where if you look at it, it says it comes from surprise Ashkenazi Jews are genetically European. And this is one of the ones that most Black Hebrew Israelites are going to go to. This one is by Tia Goose, assistant manager editor, right? But there's an abstract to this. It coming up out of Live Science that goes back to another article. But I'm going to read this one here. They both say the same thing. But I want to key in on I'm gonna screen share here, and I'm gonna let you guys see this. And let me know if you can you guys see that?
As soon as I add it, yep, now we can.
All right, so this is the article right here, and it comes out of Live Science. But it says, surprise, Ashkenazi Jews are genetically European. And this is one of the articles that they'll pull up, and they'll read from this and just get it all wrong. And that's the problem. When they start talking about DNA, and we go read what they pull up, it's not saying what they're saying, and this is not saying what they're saying. Now, most people are going to give you what you call the Ashkenazis or Khazarians. That's what they're going to tell you, right? But I want to read this real quick. It says the origin of Ashkenazi Jews who come mostly recently from Europe has largely been shrouded in mystery. But a new study suggests that at least their maternal, notice it says maternal lineage. This is not paternal. This is maternal. This comes from their mother's side, may derive largely from Europe. Now, if anybody know anything about Jews, right? Within the diaspora, both of them, Jews left their homeland, and a lot of them, according to the law, will be split up from their families, and their women will be given off to their slave masters. So clearly, according to the law, we do know that would happen. So if a Jew is found in himself to be native of a land of, I want to say India and certain, like the Koshin Jews, they're going to take on the women that are in those vicinities. And that's going to be what's on their maternal line. So when you start looking at it, they're going to look like people of India. Why? Because on their maternal line, you see that when a child comes from about, and they take on a wife from India, then you see clearly that them parents come down, he's going to look like his father or his mother. Either way, what they found out is most Jews look like the people who took them into captivity. Why? Because on their maternal side, they're closely related to the people that are native of those lands where they was taken to. So let's look what it says here. While the finding may seem intuitive, it contradicts the notion that the European Jews mostly descend from people who left Israel in the Middle East around 2,000 years ago. Instead, a substantial portion of the population originated from local Europeans who converted to Judaism. Now remember, this is the maternal lineage. This is the maternal lineage. It says, said study to co-author Martin Richards, an archaeogeneticist at the University of Huddersfield in England. It says, little is known about the history of Ashkenazi Jews before they were expelled from the Mediterranean and settled in what is now Poland around the 12th century. On an average, all Ashkenazi Jews are genetically as closely related to each other as fourth and fifth cousins, said Dr. Harry Oysterer, a pathologist, pathology, pediatrics, and genetics professor of Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York and author of Legacy and Genetic History of Jewish Population, Oxford University Press 2012, right? But what I want y'all to key in is, I'm going to jump down some more. let's go to somebody got an echo in the back. I think they moved around. You can hear it.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself by accident.
It says, but depending on whether the lineage gets traced through maternal or paternal DNA or through the rest of the genome, researchers get very different answers for whether Ashkenazis originally came from Europe or the Near East. Watch this. Past research found that 50% to 80% of DNA from the Y chromosome, from the Ashkenazi Y chromosome, which is used to trace the male lineage, watch this, originated in the Near East, Richard said. So when we talk about those J1 markers, J2 markers, we talk about different E1, B1 markers you see that come from Moroccan Jews, also other Jews, Mizraim Jews, Mountain Jews, Elam Jews. These are markers that you see that have J1, J2 markers that we see that are traced back from what we see Near East and also from Middle East, what we call the Levant area today. It says, which is used to trace the male lineage originated in the Near East, Richard said, that supported a story wherein Jews came from Israel, largely excused intermarriage when they settled in Europe, the Holy Land. So when you look at the European Jews, they look like Europeans, right? And some of them look like also those who are from the Levant areas are either people who are from the Middle East or Near East, right? And so when you look at what you call other Jews, Mizraim Jews, they look like people that are of Egypt. When you look at Moroccan Jews, they look like people that are of North Africa. All of them look like the people who they went to. Why? Because as we see with an example that happened with the Ashkenazi Jews, they took on women in those areas. And we know you're going to look like your mother, father, if not both of them. So it can be that an Ashkenazi Jew who is a European Jew can look exactly like the Europeans. Why? Because as you've seen on their maternal line, they took on women from those areas. And when those alleles are passed down, it's going to have mutations on both sides, Y, and also that X marker that is passed down. So look what it says here. But historical documents tell a slightly different tale. Based on accounts such as those of Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, by the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70, as many as 6 million Jews were living in the Roman Empire. That's where they was living at. But outside Israel, mainly in Italy and Southern Europe. In contrast, only about 500,000 lived in Judea, said Oysterer, who was not involved in the new study. The major Jewish communities were outside Judea, Oysterer told the live stream. Now, most people might look at it and say, well, here's the maternal DNA. It tells you right here. Richards and his colleagues analyzed mitochondrial DNA, the woman's side, which is contained in the cataplasma of the egg and passed down only from the mother from more than 3,500 people throughout the Near East, the Caucasus, and Europe, including Ashkenazi Jews. The team found that 4 founders were responsible for 40% of Ashkenazi, watch this, mitochondrial DNA, and that all of these founders originated in Europe. The majority of the remaining people could be traced to other European lineages, and all told, more than 80% of maternal lineages of Ashkenazi Jews could be traced to Europe, with only a few lineages originated in the Near East. So that's on the maternal side. When you read this article, we just read on the paternal side, did they have DNA that comes back from the Near East, that originates from the Near East. You can't get past it. You can't escape that. So this is an article that you want to check out. You can, I'm going to put this in the chat room, and you guys can check that out and go from there with that. And the rest of this article out. And, you know, that's really what I got to say on that part. And the vocab, if you want to add to that, you can say something, or anybody else or whatever.
Well, you kind of brought up the Khazars. I guess maybe we should. I mean, I don't know if people kind of understand what that hypothesis is all about. I mean, so a lot of times you'll have people who want to displace any given modern Jewish population, and they'll say, well, they're really Khazars. And there was a kingdom that there's some historical evidence that they kind of had a mass conversion into Judaism. And I think this would be kind of roughly in the area around maybe what's called modern day Georgia. And in fact, when they do genetic studies on this, since we don't really know exactly what a Khazar is, I think they use sort of the Georgians as an analog genetically. And G-Con could correct me about some of this stuff. And then what happens is people will say, well, modern day Jews are actually Khazars. Now, there's a few things with that, because what they're trying to say is these folks aren't really Jews. They're actually Khazarians. So they're actually converts. So they're imposters. Well, that would only affects, even if like the kind of theory was true. The question is, how does that explain all of modern day Jewry? Because you could explain it from certain populations or something like that, and from a certain point going forward. But how would you explain all of modern day Jewry? So how would that explain these long-standing communities in Iraq and Iran, for example, the Baghdadi Jews, as they're called, out of Iraq, and the Persian Jews or Iranian Jews? How would explain them, who are these long-standing communities who have been there since captivity? So how would that do that? It would only explain certain parts. There's also a question of numbers. So how many Khazars converted, right? And so the point is that with the Khazarian theory, there's some truth to it, meaning there were Khazars who converted, but we don't really know the numbers. And then it doesn't explain everything, and it doesn't explain anything before. So sometimes they'll read Revelation and be like, look, they're imposters, they're Khazars. Well, hold on. The Revelation 2:9, written in the 1st century, how would this later conversion, kind of in the beginning of the medieval era, whenever it was, how was that going to explain Revelation 2:9-3:9 when it's writing in the 1st century? It wouldn't, because it wouldn't be Khazars yet, even if it was true. But it appears you're talking a small percentage of modern day Jewish populations, like perhaps out of the Ashkenazi, maybe there's 3% from the analysis I heard that could have what looks to be some kind of version of Khazarian DNA. And again, some of this is speculative, because it's like, what do we know of who they were? But it's usually just, go ahead.
Let me say this real quick. I'm a screen share, and I want to add to that really quick.
Yeah, go back and forth, man. Just go back and forth. Whatever you got, just boom, 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 boom. I'm not really presenting like I was kind of in the beginning, G-Con, so I'm just whatever. Yeah.
We also got a caller, guys. So
okay, maybe G-Con says what he wants to say.
Okay, so can you guys see my screen real quick? All right, so if you look at it, it says choice of surrogate populations. Now, this comes from Aaron Wright. I'm gonna go up and let y'all look at this article, right? This is an NCBI article. This comes from Aaron Elhock. Now it says the missing link of Jewish European ancestry, contrasting the Rhineland and Khazarian hypothesis. Now this is the one who is one of the guys who basically did the study, and he's a geneticist, but he made some errors, and a lot of the mainstream people who you see who are geneticists try to check him on his errors, but he didn't basically correct himself. And somebody got some noise going in the background still. But if you look at here, I want to go right here where it says choice of surrogate populations. Now, I want to read this real quick, because this is one of the errors that Aaron Elhock actually made when it comes to the Khazarians. It says, as the ancient, like Vocab said, there in 700 AD is around this time when they start talking about the Khazarians. But prior to that, if you look at the areas, Israelites would have been dispersed to those areas. Why? Because most of the empires absorbed each other once they came into play. And that was one of the areas that Israelites would have been scattered to, as well as other populations who were scattered during the times of Babylon and the Syrian kings, or whatever the case may be, and after that. So look what it says here. As the ancient Judeans and Khazars have been vanquished. Now this is from his own abstract, his own writings. As the ancient Judeans and Khazars have been vanquished and their remains have yet to be sequenced in accordance with previous studies. You can see he gives the sources here. So you can't say that a person that a person is a Khazarian based upon DNA. Why? Because you don't have any Khazarian DNA. It's been vanquished. Now, on the case of ancient Judeans, it's possible that we have ancient Canaanite DNA, which lines up with Ashkenazi and other Jews markers that they have. That is another article that they, a recent paper that they came out with, to where they kind of sequence the same, which goes way back around about 35 to 4,500 years ago with Canaanites that were in Lebanon and those areas. And so when you look at this paper, you can't say that a person is a Khazarian because you went to those populations that are there today, and those populations that are there today is a bottleneck. Why? Because that area is the most, I want to say, the second diverse area, because of it's been overran through many of empires and many of wars. So that area, you can't say I'm going to go and test these people that are there today. They don't claim to be Khazarians. In your paperwork, you said you have no Khazarian DNA. It's been vanquished. So you can't say that these people are Khazarians based upon that alone, genetically. And the Khazarian theory is something that has been mainstream scientists, and they do not hold that. They don't go by that. Why? Because it holds no weight, and the majority of people are against Aaron Elhak and his work that are scholars that's been in this field and that has come together and said that his work is not credible. He took his methodology is based upon his opinion rather than what the actual paperwork and also studies are saying as geneticists. So I disagree with the Khazarian theory hypothesis based upon his own work here, that as you see how he chose his methodology of going about to sequence populations that are modelly there today, but you don't have no Khazarian DNA at all to even sequence that because it's been vanquished.
Yeah, I think a good book to get is Kevin Allen Brooks' second edition of the Jews of Khazaria. It's an academic book, so I'm not talking about the first edition, because the first edition was like 1975, and I don't think he was able to really have DNA evidence in there. But this is edition I'm talking about is 2006, and he concludes that you don't have a situation where you got essentially the progenitors of Ashkenazi Jews being Khazarian, and genetics is part of the reasoning for his conclusion there. And people will refer to the 13th tribe by Arthur Kessler, and I think it's the one Shlomo Pines or Sand inventing the Jewish people, and they'll kind of just put it out there as if that does it, but they usually don't understand a lot of the issues related to it. And so on a historical and now genetic level, really those have been discounted as far as the way they've been presented. It's one thing to say, okay, here's this little kind of drop in a bucket. It's another to say all Jews are this, because this would only, first of all, explain Ashkenazi Jews, not all Jews, but they try to use it as, well, these Jews are just, and so, but it also, there's not enough information and evidence that you have this total replacement. It's like a ridiculous thing. Like they converted, they came in, and then, the Jews taught them how to be Jewish, and then all of a sudden the Khazarians, what did they do? Did they kill them all? Like, where did they go? Because they're converting into something. And another funny thing about this hypothesis, when the one Westers present it, they're like presenting this, the Khazarians, that's what the Jews are. You hear them call them that. Oh, so you're telling me that your supposed ancestors believed in conversion then? Because they have this whole massive Gentile kingdom coming on in, teaching them how to do the do. You see what I'm saying? They use their information in isolation. Like, do you realize when you say that, you're telling me that your ancestors believed in conversion? Which the small reality to Khazarian conversion, however large it was, does actually show that. And so it's actually, the theory ends up being evidence against some of the Hebrewites' very position, those who are sort of the anti-conversion type, right? And so it's a very interesting thing. There's a lot more to get into it, but on a historical and scientific level, It's not a credible thing as far as a replacement theory. To say something happened and there's the small percentage left, I think that's true enough. And I think most of the data, it looks like you might have around 3% where you have it still basically present within Ashkenazi population. So a very small thing. But so, it's a very interesting thing. So, what are kind of the quote original Jews? Well, you don't have this one-to-one correlation because these aren't what are called founders populations where there's basically been zero intermarriage. It's minimal. But it looks like, they're people from the Levant who themselves were a mixed bag. And as they go out throughout the world over 2 millennia, they have intermarriage and converts. So it's not going to be a one-to-one correlation anyway. And that's why you find Jews spread out all over who end up looking different than they would have looked in the first century. The closest kind of rough analog we have to what Jews from the first century would look like, and this is based upon things like artwork and even skulls and skeletons that have been found in Galilee, would be the Baghdadi Jews. And if somebody wants to see that, look up Jews of Iraq or Iraqi Jews. Now there's only 4 left, is my understanding, left in Iraq because of persecution and all kinds of horrible things. So now they're spread throughout the world, and they're sometimes called Baghdadi Jews, but they don't actually live in Baghdad anymore. But you look at that population, and the consensus is that's the closest to what perhaps first century Jews, as far as if a person's concerned really with looks, would have looked like, because it's highly unlikely that most, like for example, Ashkenazis would represent sort of the look of a first century Jew. I think that's pretty well established. If we're just doing, because the look thing is very superficial ultimately, because it's only a small expression of the underlying DNA. It's a very, very small kind of superficial thing. And it's silly to base it upon, especially when a lot of the Hebrew Israelites believe that they're intermixing with these African populations, but a lot of them don't think they're African. Well, so it shows the look's not really even important anyway, because you're saying someone can like look so similar that you kind of forgot you were them and they're intermixed. You know what I'm saying? But you're not them because of a vibration that they give or something like that. And these guys will actually say, well, Africans move different than us, and really odd stuff like that. But it's quite a bizarre thing. So the thing is, we're not obsessed with this. But the thing is, because they go here, we have to end up talking about it. And it does lead to some interesting avenues. But that's kind of the final thing I'll say. You said you had a caller or something, unless G-Com want to say something. Was that what you said?
Well, I did have a caller, but he seems to be having connection problems or something because he's sitting in here not connected. So. Oh,
okay. Okay. Well, all right.
Yeah, just to chime in with what you brothers are saying, it's so good. We have Rahab coming from the Canaanites into the Israelite lineage. We have Moses marrying a Cushite and Joseph marrying an Egyptian. And all of these represent major people groups converting into Israel just in that time. So what you guys are saying, when they're coming into European lands, the women would be fair game, right? If they converted, and that would be part of their culture. So I don't get why that's such a hang up, but I know that has to fit into their way of thinking. But maybe, brothers, you could answer this for me. How do they deal with it just in the things we already know? Let's say like with Moses and Zipporah, you take the DNA of that child, that's not going to be pure Israelite. That's going to represent part of that Cushite land and part of the Israelite, like exactly like as if they go to Europe, right, and disperse among those people. I mean, how do they answer this when we see it in the Bible already happening?
Jeremiah 29, it says here, let's go to verse 6. It says, let's look at verse 4. It says, Jeremiah 29, verse 4. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon. Build ye houses, and dwell in them, and plant gardens, and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives, and begot sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that ye may be increased there and not diminished. So, because of the Israelites was under strict, they was under the law of Moses. They broke the law of Moses. When you read the Old Testament, it talks about how they're going to watch their children given to people and their wives given to people. The Israelites will take on, and what we see in the DNA, they took on foreign wives. And when they took on foreign wives, those foreign wives that you see is what we see on the maternal side. And that's why they begin to look at the people that are on their, like for instance, when we look at the Koshin Jews, I got an abstract from the Koshin Jews, which is a form of small and unique community on the Malabar coast in southwest India. Those Jews look just like the people that's of India, but they are Jews that say that they came up out of the first diaspora, the first temple. They stayed there. They never experienced a 70 AD. They stayed there. Matter of fact, what's interesting is because when 1948 took place, guess when they started coming back? When that prophecy took place. Now, most people say, well, 1948 is not a prophecy or whatever case may be, from whether it's Black Hebrew Israelites, Christians, someone believe that. And that's cool. I don't hold them for that. But when you read Zechariah 14, when Christ comes back to the land in Zechariah 14, somebody is in that land that he's gathering people all against Jerusalem to fight there. And it says that he will come and save them. Who's in that land? And if you want to talk about politics or whatever case may be, what happened with the 1948 thing, politicking was happening with God when it happened with Cyrus. When you read the Cyrus cylinder, Israel was not the only people that Cyrus told that they can go back and build their temple. He told the people of Babylon that they can build their temple onto Marduk, which is a false god. So, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Hey, G-Con, have you ever heard of this Native Americans were like speaking Hebrew and pre-contact thing? This is one of the trolls that was on my show after Joe left, like going off hard, and I actually hoped he would come back on here. I think he's like a Mormon or something. I don't know, but he was giving me links to these books from like 1830 written by like Barbara Ann something. So like, yeah, could you like address that? Because I don't even really know what he's talking about or how to answer his question.
Did you want to address that, Vocab, or did you want me to?
Yeah, well, we talk a little bit about it. Maybe you'll say it.
It looks like Vocab wants to say something about it.
Well, so you notice, so we're discussing genetics, especially as it relates to people, not just, but a lot on the African continent. Now, G-Con just mentioned the Indian Jews. I mentioned them earlier. I just said the Jews in India. I couldn't remember. I just talked about them. So we're saying the same thing about that right there. But now we're talking about linguistic similarities, and it's with Native Americans, right? And so what you had happening is a few things that Hebrewites generally, they do their history totally out of context. It's acontextual in a way that is almost hard to believe. I mean, it's almost like they might as well be Scientologists, some of these guys. It's so bad. So here's what you have going on. A lot of these Europeans and colonialists, they wondered where the lost tribes went. They didn't know where they were. There was all these legends. And this is a really good book to get on it by Tudor Parfit, The Lost Tribes of Israel, The History of a Myth, and how you had these different people who were claiming things, and then you had basically Europeans also looking for where are these lost tribes at. And some of it had to do with some of their views on eschatology. A lot of them read Romans 11 and believed there would be a final kind of massive revival of a Jewish people. And so because of that, they were like, well, the Jews in Europe and the places we are, they're not converting. Maybe the lost tribes are going to be the converting. So they're looking for these, because when they discover Native Americans, they're like, wait a minute, where did these people come from? This land's not mentioned in the Bible, is it? Now, some people will say, oh, it's mentioned in here or in the Apocrypha or stuff like that. That's all very dubious. But basically, most people are like, this isn't mentioned in the Bible. Who are these people? Where did they come from? Right? It was like this massive mystery, because remember, evolution hadn't set in. So they had a view of one single ancestor, right? You know, Adam, and of course you have a bottleneck there with Noah again. But the idea is we all must come. We all come. Most people thought we all come from the same. So there has to be an explanation. So even if they weren't Christian, they sort of had this biblical view of like historical origins. This is a general picture of that at the time. So part of that ends up with them making connections wherever they were going at the time. They did this in Africa. They did this in the New World. This is a common thing you'll find out. And you look, And you go to these sources these folks are mentioning from these early explorers. Notice these are people making observations, honestly, out of a context of speculation, hopeful thinking, and ignorance. Not that they're dumb or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying the people writing. I'm saying that they don't know what the heck is going on. So if you read like a very common one, speaks about Native Americans, and they're saying something that sounds just like hallelujah in the name of God and all this kind of thing. The person exploring never mentions what tribe it is, so you don't know what it is. And even if you look at what he's writing, it's like this sound-alike game. It doesn't mean the same thing, right? But it's like, well, it sounds alike to me. And it's kind of clear that the person writing, and a lot of these times, they don't know Hebrew themselves. So they're trying to say these Native Americans speak Hebrew, but they don't know Hebrew. So how would they know this? See what I'm saying? And the Native Americans aren't saying they're speaking anything related to Hebrew. And the Native Americans, by and large, don't have this myth that they came over from this other place that would match up. It's all the speculation kind of put on them by some of the Europeans. And you can find these resources again and again. Now, what happened is this speculation, now we're out of the kind of the day of a lot of some of the, and
I just want to say I have a very high population of natives in this town that I live in, and I've not heard from one of them anything about this Hebrew.
Well,
anything.
If Hebrew Israelism starts spreading, you probably will start hearing it, and that's what happens with this insane poison. It convinces people to leave their actual heritage and have some imagined one because apparently they think theirs isn't good enough. So you have this situation, and this is what you find with these resources again and again when you actually look at them. Generally speaking, the people sending you these links have no idea the source. Now, here's what's happening. The Mormons did this a long time ago, because if you read the Book of Mormon, published 1830, it was very representative of a lot of East Coast speculation at that time, because actually it's hard for us to believe New York was considered the frontier of America. The part where like Joseph Smith lived was frontier America at that time. And so because of that, there's still like Native Americans kind of around these folks. And so this is speculation. You actually see it. So Joseph Smith talks about folks came over in some kind of vessel with apparently what is like a compass. And then they come over and then they establish this whole thing. And he is not the first person that said that. There's another guy, I think it's Ethan Smith, called A View of the Hebrews, and there's even charges of plagiarism. The Book of Mormon ripped off those sections. But if you read it, it's about this they leave Israel and they end up in the United States of America. And the Book of Mormon even teaches that Jesus came and actually preached to the Native Americans, and some converted, and later on the bad ones, who by the way were the darker ones, wiped out the lighter ones. Now what's happened is, so Mormons have always had an interest in proving that Native American peoples, and even down to South and Central America, are lost tribes in some way. So they have got into genetics themselves, and they've used some of these bad resources in prior years. Less and less Mormons use this. The Hebrewites are way behind, and they're kind of copying this. Now, I want to share one amazing resource on this. Check this out. This is called Losing a Lost Tribe: Native Americans, DNA, and the Mormon Church. What that person is talking about, this is not the linguistic side, this is more the DNA side.
Yeah, I thought he sounded Mormon at the end, like he was trolling me for like hours, and he started bringing up that stuff, and I was like, are you a Mormon, dude? Like, it sounded like really like Mormonish to me.
So this is Simon Southerton was a Mormon who started studying this because he had a specialization in plant science and molecular biology. He started studying the genetics related to Native Americans. And he's not the only one. Other people have done this. Found out there was no Levant DNA, no Semitic DNA. It's essentially a transferred Asiatic and even apparently parts of Russia, like Siberian populations, mainly when you talk about who the Native Americans were. And so Losing a Lost Tribe is an example of a total debunking by a person who was a former believer in this. And this gets into it. So the same material you use to debunk Mormons on this point literally can be used for the One West Hebrew Israelites. Now, not all Hebrew Israelites believe Native Americans are, right? But here's another example of a book. This is called The Origins of Native Americans: Evidence from Anthropological Genetics. This is Cambridge University. Highly technical, and it's not necessarily about debunking that. It's just about what it really is. And when you go through and find out what it really is, you see what it really isn't, and it isn't what the Hebrew Israelites or some of the holdout Mormons ever said about it. So this linguistic stuff is like this simple, silly, sound-alike stuff that no one knows what tribe these guys are talking about. The people doing the research don't know Hebrew. It's all based upon all these problematic presuppositions. And then you got people linking like, I bet you never heard of this. Why don't you talk about that? Why are you lying? Why are you hiding the information? That kind of stuff. And it's like, bro, and this is what we're dealing with nonstop. And here's what's wild. I have a couple guys who are kind of down in my squad. I got this one guy, shout out to brother Phil Fox. He started checking out what I was doing because Hebrew Israelism was encroaching on his reservation where he was ministering at. And so there's actually some of these guys changing. And recently I saw a video where G-Con was kind of clowning a guy who had some interesting headwear. I don't know if you know G-Con. That guy is in Arizona. And that guy uses the Book of Mormon and claims it was written by a black Jew. He is combining Hebrew Israelism with Mormonism and the reservations out in AZ. And I've had a number of people say, hey, my family's getting caught up in this. Can you answer? I have not had time to really break his stuff down, but he's a main proponent of that kind of stuff. So you see this a lot. And you even see some of these guys share videos sometimes by Glenn Beck, because Glenn Beck is a Mormon and used to do kind of like some lay-level apologetics when he used to have a show and stuff. And there's some times where you see him talking about some of this stuff, and they'd be like, did a Hebrew Israelite share a video by conservative commentator Glenn Beck? And you actually see that these kinds of things happen. So it's a very bizarre thing, but there's videos, like one is about DNA, Native Americans. It's published by some Christian apologist. Really good. You can still get it. And it deals with the DNA issue in relation to Native Americans. It's in relation to the Mormon issue, but basically all the issues are almost identical. So the work's actually already been done. And there's a secular book. It's written by atheists. It's called The American Apocrypha. I'd recommend as well. Go ahead.
Oh, that guy who's questioning your answering, he just sent me an email that said, "Send the link, bitch." So he might be coming in here with some hardcore proof.
G-Con, my bad. I took too long in that.
But hey, thank you though, Vocab. You really clarified a lot for me. I really understand a lot more now where this guy's coming from.